There's a type of person who spends their entire adult life reacting to things that stopped happening decades ago. They don't know they're doing it, and that's exactly what makes it so difficult to see. The way a person handles conflict, the way they respond to love, the way they cope when things fall apart. None of it is random. None of it was chosen. It was built quietly, gradually, in the earliest years of life, before they had any say in the matter at all. In the 1950s, a British psychiatrist named John Bowlby was studying children who had been separated from their parents. What he found changed the way we understand human development entirely. He discovered that the bond formed between a child and their primary caregiver becomes the blueprint, not just for how that child relates to other people, but for how they relate to themselves. He called it attachment theory, and what it revealed was that the emotional patterns people carry into adulthood were not weaknesses, they were adaptations, responses that made complete sense in the environment they were formed in. The problem is that environment no longer exists, but the responses are still running. In the 1980s, researchers at the University of Minnesota conducted one of the most significant studies in developmental psychology. The Minnesota Longitudinal Study of Risk and Adaptation followed children from birth into adulthood, tracking how their earliest relationships shaped their later lives. What they found was striking. Children who experienced consistent, responsive caregiving were significantly more likely to develop emotional resilience, social confidence, and healthy relationships as adults. Children who experienced inconsistent or absent caregiving were significantly more likely to struggle with anxiety, emotional regulation, and trust, not because of who they were, because of what they learned. The second study goes further. The Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, known as the ACE study, was conducted by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente and involved over 17,000 participants. It found that childhood experiences of stress, instability, or adversity had measurable effects on adult physical and mental health outcomes decades later. Not as memories, as biology. The body keeps a record that the conscious mind never had access to. And here is what both studies point to, that most people never fully understand. The behaviors that look like personality are often just patterns, patterns that were learned so early they feel like identity, but they aren't. There are 6 patterns commonly seen in people who were shaped by their childhood without knowing it. 1. They find it difficult to ask for help. Not because they're proud, because somewhere very early they learned that needing something was either unsafe, unwelcome, or pointless. So they stopped asking, and they're still not asking. 2. They apologize for things that aren't their fault. People who grew up in environments where tension was unpredictable often learned to manage that tension by taking responsibility for it. It was a survival strategy then. In adult relationships, it looks like people pleasing. 3. They struggle to sit with uncertainty. For people raised in unpredictable environments, the nervous system learned to stay alert, to scan for what might go wrong. In adulthood, that looks like anxiety, over-planning, or an inability to relax, even when everything is actually fine. 4. They self-sabotage when things are going well. This one is particularly difficult to see from the inside. When good things feel unfamiliar, the nervous system treats them as suspicious. So people unconsciously create the kind of disruption that feels more like home. 5. They have a very high tolerance for behavior that isn't acceptable. People who normalize chaos or emotional unpredictability in childhood often struggle to recognize when something is wrong in adult relationships. Not because they don't deserve better, because better doesn't feel normal yet. 6. They are exceptionally good at reading other people's emotions. This one looks like a gift, and in many ways it is, but it was built out of necessity. Children who needed to anticipate the emotional state of the adults around them in order to feel safe became highly attuned to other people's feelings. They grew into adults who are deeply empathetic, but often completely disconnected from their own emotional needs. Here is what the research actually shows. The people who display these patterns most strongly are not broken. They are adapted. There is a difference. Consider two people raised in very different environments. The first grew up in a home that was calm, consistent, and emotionally safe. They learned that the world was predictable, that people could be trusted, that asking for help worked. The second grew up in a home that was unpredictable, where emotional safety was inconsistent, where they had to work to feel secure. They learned a completely different set of rules. Neither set of rules was wrong for the environment it was built in. The difficulty comes when the environment changes, but the rules don't. The second person carries their rulebook into a world that operates very differently from the one it was written for, and they spend years wondering why certain things feel so hard when for other people they seem effortless. The answer isn't a character flaw, it's a context mismatch. The rulebook made perfect sense once, it just hasn't been updated. What tends to help people who recognize these patterns is not dramatic change. It's awareness first. The moment a pattern is named and understood, it loses some of its automatic power. Not all of it, but some. And that is where change becomes possible. The first shift that research points to is the ability to separate the pattern from the identity. People who are built by their childhood without knowing it often mistake their adaptations for their personality. They think, this is just who I am. The research suggests otherwise. These are things that were learned, which means they are things that can, over time, be unlearned. The second shift is recognizing that the patterns served a purpose. They weren't weaknesses, they were intelligent responses to the environment that existed at the time. Understanding that changes the relationship a person has with their own history, from shame to something closer to compassion, and that shift changes everything that comes after it. One important note: everything in this video is for educational purposes only. It is not a substitute for professional support. If any of this resonates on a deeper level, please reach out to someone qualified to help. These patterns are not unique. They are not rare. It turns out they're completely normal.